Hi everybody, welcome to Halo Inspirations, where we give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. My name is Angel, and I just want to say thank you for stopping by our channel today. So the last few weeks we talked about prepping your fabric, and then we talked about squaring and cutting your fabric, and then we even went and tried to get control of our 1/4 inch seam. So this week, as a follow-up, it's just a simple video to give some beginner techniques to help increase a little speed, organization. We're going to actually do a little bit of ironing, or we don't iron, pressing, and really tackle some of these really basic beginner techniques. So we're going to get started. And what I've done, we are actually going to use a 4-patch to demonstrate some of these techniques. And if you're wondering what a 4-patch is, I actually put one together with some of my scrap materials. And so basically what you've got here are 2 squares sewn together, 2 more squares sewn together, and then we sew them all together to equal a 4-patch. You might even see things like a 9-patch, which is 3 by 3. You might see a 16-patch, which is 4 by 4. You could even go as far as 25, wherever, as long as the pattern had called for it. That's basically what they're talking about when we talk about 4, 9, 16 patches. That's the concept. So we're working with a 4-patch. And I've actually cut together some 2.5 inch squares. They're enough to do 3 4-patches. So the next step that I'm going to take you into the table, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of what I do to keep myself organized, knowing what to sew when. And in a 4-patch, it's kind of an easy concept, but as you do more, like a 9-patch, for instance, really keep in some sort of organized fashion will help you remember what needs to be sewn and when. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so here we are zoomed in on my sewing table, and what I've done is I went ahead and laid out my squares with the same color, with the same print on top of each other. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to just lay out the blocks as if what we're going to want to sew. Now if you notice on this 4-patch, we have a light color and a dark color, and then a dark color and a light color. The important thing is that your lights are adjacent and your darks are not adjacent, diagonal, and the darks are diagonal from each other. So we're going to do the same thing with those blocks, okay? So we've got a red one and a white one, and then catty corner from the red is the blue, and another white catty corner, diagonal, whatever you want to say. And then we're going to do another one, and we have one more. Okay, so this is what I do. I lay out all my blocks before I sew them, and what this does is it actually gives you an opportunity to see if this is what you like. And you could, if you needed to switch something around, you could do it now and before it's all sewn, and then you figured out you didn't like it and then have to rip it out, because we want to save as much ripping away as possible. This is pretty simple pattern. Yes, I mean the 4-patch is a simple concept, and I have actually used all the same prints and colors. It really is at this point in laying things out like this, when you're using different prints, and yeah, you might have a light and a dark, but they're different colors, this would really stand out for you, taking a peek to see if there's just something that your eye just doesn't appreciate, and then make that change. So then the next step that I do is taking on the right side, I flip everything on top of the left, okay? And then I have these Wonder Clips, and if you don't have them, you can use pins. It's not unnecessary. But I go and on the right side here, I clip everything together. Now, I usually sit here before I clip and I try to get them pretty good lined up before I clip, but I'll do that off camera. So I'm just going to go ahead and clip them all on the right side. Okay. Now what this does, even if you used pins, but what it does is it allows you to remember when you go to sit down to your sewing machine and sew these, you're going to remember which side you're supposed to sew. Because I can forget, especially when it starts to get a lot more squares and blocks that you're sewing together. I tend to be, and then you sew the wrong side and then you're going to have to seam rip it. So you and Jack will have another date. So at this point, this is what I do. Now, like I said, I'm going to go off camera and actually line them up pretty well. And then I just simply stack them on top of each other. All right. And then I sit down to sew. So I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my squares are pretty good lined up. And then when I come back, you are going to see me from the machine side. So we'll begin to construct this together and I'll show you some techniques. Okay, so here we are at my sewing machine. All the blocks have been put together. I have the clips on still. So we're going to talk a little bit first about pinning. If you notice, I do use a seam guide. If you remember from previous videos, it is set up for a scant 1/4 inch. And I just want to show you that if in fact I was going to pin like I didn't have a seam guide, I would do it like so. You want to pin on both sides, on the same side that you're sewing on. Okay? If you were to pin down here and then sew up here, it wouldn't help up here because then this side can still shift. The idea of the pins is to hold it. And I'm telling you, as a beginner, I pinned everything. I typically don't pin this size anymore. But there is some things that I still pin. But as a beginner, I pinned it all. So I got my pins in. Sometimes when the block's really large, you might want to put one right in the middle. This isn't a very big block, so it would be 2. But if I did it like this, you would notice that my seam guide is going to be in the way of guiding my fabric with these pins. And then once my needle got close to, my pin got close to the needle, I would have a lot of trouble getting out that pin. So for me, I pin the opposite direction. That's not going to work. Now remember, on the same side that you're going to sew is where you want to put those pins. Make sure everything's lined up before you do it. Now what you could do if you're pinning, you could sit here and pin all of your blocks, okay? That way they're already done before you go to sew. So then you want to just go ahead and line up your fabric inside there. Hold on to your tail of thread. And you want to, oh boy, it's really close to the pin. There we go. So I'm going to lower my foot. And because it's in there and I've got it secure, I'm going to go ahead and pull out my pin. I don't want to sew over it. If you sew over your pins, you have a potential of the needle coming down onto the pin. It can break the needle. It could bend the needle. If the needle breaks, it could pop and come at you. Or you can even throw off some timing in your sewing machine, and then you'd have to take it in first ball bath. So now I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Now remember, we're not going to push, we're not going to pull, we're just going to guide. I'm going to get it started, hanging onto that thread. Okay. And then when it gets close again, you want to pull that pin out. And you want to go ahead, finish your sewing. Now I have a thread cutter, but I'm going to pretend this time that I don't. So I'd pull all these out, I'd cut my threads, and you'd have your first block. Now if we did one at a time, we would have a constant long threads, and this is, you know, it's using a lot more thread than you might need. So one idea that you can do is you can actually use what is called a spider. And they call this thing, one of the names anyway, a spider, because as you sew through the fabric, it grows thread legs, and you have to bear with the dogs in the area. I had one that had surgery, so I have to leave the door open. So the threads will make what, like spider legs, okay? But you could use one of these. So we're going to go ahead, and I'll show you what this means. We're going to take our second one, get it nice and lined up. Okay, and go ahead and sew. Okay, and then instead of cutting it, we'll take our spider and we'll go ahead and send it through. Now, what that's doing, not only is it saving some thread, but it is also, sometimes when you get started, the feed dogs will grab that first corner and it'll bunch it down inside of your feed dogs, and then you kind of get a mess. So that helps prevent that too. Now that's a spider. And then what you would do from here is you would simply cut after the spider. Okay. And then you would have your next block. Cut this thread. So now we've got 2 blocks, but instead of a spider, I'm actually going to show you another technique that we call chain piecing. Now remember, I know what side I need to sew because I've clipped all mine. So I'm just going to show you what chain piecing is, and it adds a little speed and you use less thread again. You slip it underneath there, make sure your corner is lined up, you guide that fabric through. Now instead of using that spider, I'm going to grab another block and I'm going to get it real close there. I'm again going to send it through, and 2 more. Send that through. And last one. So this is our chain piecing. I mean, and if you had all of these, if you were pinning and you had them all pre-pinned, you could simply do each one at a time. Now I'm just slipping underneath my presser foot. I lift it up a little bit and I get it closer to the needle. All right, making sure things are straight. So the last one through. Okay, so now you can get quite a bunch. I mean, if you had 20 of these to sew together or 30 of them, you can really, and that's okay. It doesn't hurt anything. So at this point, we're going to leave this block underneath the needle. So now this is the ender, okay? We're going to leave it underneath and we're going to cut the string or the thread, and if you'll notice how much less thread that we've actually used. Okay, and then you just simply cut the threads in between, and now we have all of our blocks but this one. So the next thing that we're going to do, let me clean this up just a little. okay, is we're going to finger press open our blocks. And usually you want to go to the dark side, and I'll show you in a little bit why you would want to do that. So going to the seam, going to the dark side, what that means is my seam is facing towards that dark side, okay? And then you just give it a nice little finger press. Set that aside. We'll get out the next one. Remember, we're going towards the dark side. So if you put the dark one on top and fold it over, the seam will go towards the dark side, right? All right. So we would do that with each one of these, and I'll get it done off camera and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got them all finger pressed. Okay. And now I don't know how much you're going to be able to really see, so I'm actually going to attempt to throw a picture up for you to demonstrate this a little better, where it's closer view. However, remember we did our seams towards the dark side on both sides, so what that does is it allows you to nest your seams together and get them. If I don't need to throw up a picture, I won't, but I won't be able to know this until I'm done with the video. So if I think I need to, I'll get a hold and take a picture for you. But so they are nested together, okay? And at this point, you want to take a pin and you want to go ahead and pin a little bit to the right to hold those seams together as best as you can. Let me put my glasses on and make sure I'm lining it up right. Yeah. Okay, and then you want to take another pin and you want to line up your corners. You want to pin on one side, line up your corner, okay, pin on the other side, and that should keep everything held together so you don't shift, okay? Now we're going to go ahead. Now you can do that with both of these. So maybe I'll just go ahead and do that real quick. So that's nesting your seams. And that's, you know, because we finger pressed it to the dark side, you actually are able to nest them. Now, not always do you get the opportunity to do that. There are some times when a pattern will tell you either to press them, you know, with the seams open instead of to one side, or go all the same. And then, you know, so there are some situations when you're not able to nest those seams, but any opportunity that you have, I'm still not lining up with this one, that you have to nest them, it really keeps those points lined up and pretty. Okay, and I'm just taking a peek because I don't think I'm nesting them right. Sometimes I'm able to just feel it and I can send it through with feeling it. I might just have to do that with this one because I'm having just a little trouble. Okay, then you do the corner. So you could just sit here, you know, and basically like an assembly line and get all of your blocks prepped. Okay, and then when you're ready to sew, everything is ready to go. Now remember, we still have the ender that goes with this last block. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get this started. I'm going to lift it up, get it close to that needle. Get it all lined up. Now, I also want to take a second and I want you to notice this seam is facing towards the machine. This seam is facing away. So when it goes over any lip at all, it's going to push, as I'm pushing this way, it's going to keep that seam underneath that I can't see. It's going to keep it underneath nice and pretty and not get it distorted. At least that's the object of the game. So we're going to go ahead and get this one started. I didn't catch it. There we go. There we go. Oh, almost. Whew. Okay. I'm not used to sewing this stuff with pins anymore. That's obvious. Okay, so we're going to go along here. And as we get closer, something I like to do, I like to hold my seam down sometimes as I get closer because my finger can't get under there and I don't want it to flip. And as soon as my needle hits this side of the seam, it's locked in place. So I'm going to head and pull out this pin, okay, and then continue to sew. Now this, we're almost at the end here. Get closer, pull that pin out. Go ahead and finish it up. Grab the next one. Get it close to the needle. Oh, still didn't get in there. Whoops. There we go. Okay. As soon as I get on, there we go. I'm going to pull off this pin. We're going to go along. And remember, when we get on this side of the seam, as soon as that needle hits that seam, where it locks that seam in, I can go ahead and pull that pin out, and we can go ahead and keep then sewing, keeping everything straight. Now, getting close. There we are. Pull out my pin. All right, now remember, we still have one more. So I'm going to get my scissors. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to snip it. Whoop. Put the dark side on top. Give it a finger press. Line it up like we want. I want to sew this end together. I want to flip it over, it's easier. All right. Nest those seams. Grab a pin. Oh, nope, I got to do it this way. And the reason is because I want the pin on this side, the right side of the seam. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pin it like so. Line up my corner. Pin that one. Last corner. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and get it close. Okay, pull that pin. Now remember, this seam is facing towards me. This seam is facing towards the machine. So the only one I really have to worry about is the one on top, because sometimes it gets flipped as it approaches. Okay, as soon as that needle hits that seam, I go ahead and pull that needle out, or that pin out. Go ahead and finish her up. Now, if you had more to do at this point, you could keep running them. So again, we're chain piecing with that. I, in fact, do not have, we only made 3. So I could just simply, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to pull this pin out and I'm going to go ahead and finish it up. go ahead and give her a cut. And there we have our 3 blocks. Now let's just see. Let me get these cut. You would at this point open it up, and again we're going to finger press it for now. So you would do that with these 2, and then the next step is we're going to go ahead and iron. So I'm going to turn you off for a minute, and then I'll bring you over. Well, we're going to press. Remember, we don't iron. So I'm going to take you over to my ironing board, and we're going to go from there. Okay, so here we are at my pressing mat. And I have these 3 squares here. Now this one I went ahead and opened so I could show you when you nest your seams how pretty your points will be. But typically at the end of the block I will go ahead and bring them over to my pressing mat and go ahead and press this seam. I set the seam. Now I didn't do that. You know, the general rule is that you don't sew over a seam that hasn't been pressed. Now you saw when I built these blocks that I simply finger pressed open these 2 first, and of course there was this seam. However, I finger pressed it, correct? The reason I didn't use an iron is because I worry a little bit about distortion, and you get enough heat from your fingers to really be able to use, you know, that heat to get it pressed. So it does the same thing, and I worry less about distortion than I do with an iron. Now if you notice now, I am just going ahead and simply holding the iron down on top of the seam. There are molecules inside of this of cotton, so when you heat it up like that, it kind of allows the thread to sink down into your cotton. So you really want to get that first. The next thing is then you want to go ahead and open her up, and then you're going to want to finger press. Now there's a couple of things about finger pressing. Some people just do this way, right? However, you got to be careful with that because you can still distort. So another method that I have seen taught is that you go and you just kind of push it in, okay? Just kind of get it open here. Now, another reason that you set your seam is if you had any puckers or anything, it actually, you know, kind of melts them out a little bit. You know, setting that seam does so many different things. So we set the seam, we finger pressed. Now you're going to take your iron, and you're not going to swish it, and you're not going to go back and forth like this. You want to go very carefully onto the seam, hold it down a bit, and open. So you can go into the seam very carefully and allow it to open. Same thing if you wanted to do this one. There we go. And then you can go this way. Okay. And it just melts like butter. That seam does. We'll do this one. If I hit the camera, I'm so sorry. So it wants to open this way. Set the seam one more time. Go ahead and massage this bad boy open. Take it. There we go. Very carefully. Just allow it to press it. We're only pressing. We're not ironing. We're not swish-swashing. And again, I got beautiful points. Just absolutely beautiful. And there's not much left in this seam. It's pretty flat. So I'm going to back this one up, and I'm going to set this seam. Oh yeah. I mean, you can just see that difference. I mean, look how it just melts right inside. There we go. Now see, I have a habit of going across because it doesn't, that's just something I'm used to. And then we're going to just go across it very easily. Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that. So after you've done your pressing of your blocks, then you're going to want to go ahead and measure them. Now, mine were 2.5-inch squares, and on my past video, on the 1/4-inch seam, I did some math for you, so you can use it as a reference. But with 2.5-inch squares, this should measure out at 4.5 inches as a square. 4.5 this way, 4.5 this way. So I am going to take you to my cutting board, and we're going to measure one of these blocks. If you're a little bit over, it's okay. You can shave some off. The short, you have to kind of manipulate a little bit, but that's all because you got to make sure you cut your fabric good. You got to sew a really great 1/4-inch seam, and you got to have good pressing methods, and that should allow your block to finish in the size that you desire. So I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so here we are at my cutting table. I've laid down the ruler, and as you can see, with 2.5-inch blocks, I should get 4.5 inches, and I'm really good. What's important, and what I want you to understand, is that it's important that you get the center at these points, that the center of that square is lining up. If this was too large and you needed to cut it, it'd be fine as long as this stays in the center and your seams are straight. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but over here I got a little distortion, and that's probably because I just sewed one of the seams not straight, which, again, how important that 1/4-inch seam really is. Now, it's not too bad, so my plan is if I were to use this block in something, I would just keep making sure I'd mark the line for the 1/4-inch right here, and then I'd make sure I'd sew on it. So you can see, if you don't cut your strip straight, if you don't sew your 1/4-inch seam straight, you can have a lot of distortion. This is just a little bit, and on the outside my seams look really good, and my center is exactly in the center. So this is why it's important that you go and you check those block units before you sew, and you make sure you're sewing that seam straight as you can get it without distortion, and you make sure you press without distortion. Okay, so that's it. We've sewn 3 4-patch blocks together, and we've demonstrated how to keep yourself organized, how to do some chain piecing. Maybe you use a leader ender or a starter ender. Maybe you use a spider. We've also talked about pressing and how to measure, all the good stuff. Bottom line, again, if you need to pin, no worries there. Take as long as you need to. Trust me, I pinned everything when I first started. It's really until you get comfortable making sure that you're getting the right size blocks. And then, you can venture out there. This isn't a race. It's not how fast, but that chain piecing and doing everything at once, it did speed up the process, and it does speed up the process. If you do things in assembly line, you pin everything at once, you sew every different parts at once, all of that stuff allows for a more efficient and less likely of making mistakes, and not using the Jack the Seam Ripper. I am so sorry. The sun all of a sudden started to come out. So at any rate, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. We would appreciate it. Make sure the notification bell is on so you know when I upload the next video, which there will be one next week. I'm actually going to walk through doing a rag quilt. So if you're interested in that, we're going to start that next week. More details to come next Wednesday. And also the freebie is still out there right now. It is a guide for you to understand maybe what is the essential items in your sewing toolbox to make sure you have an enjoyable and more successful quilting journey without spending a bajillion dollars, right? And it also came still right now, it's coming with a bonus. And so if you're watching this in the future, it may or may not be there. But it's a bonus of acronyms and sewing terms that you can also use as a resource to help you navigate through the quilting industry's jargon. We're also tonight, every Wednesday on our Facebook page, I go over a few things either that I wanted to be a little bit more detailed about, or I thought of something, after the video was made that I could have talked more about. It also is an opportunity if you have any questions. So every Wednesday after the video drops, I put out a Facebook Live event at 7 o'clock at a Halo Inspiration. put the link downstairs. And we also do a Facebook community group called Halo's Creative Kingdom. I'll put a link for that. We'd love to have you there. It's a great group of quilters. Very, very awesome, supporting, positive people that are in that group. And it is private, so you'll have to answer some questions so that you can get the key to the kingdom. However, until next time, I hope that you continue, and may you continue, to be inspired, productive, and joyful, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. Happy quilting, everybody.